The rain hammered against the cracked windows of Rosie's diner like bullets against glass, each drop a reminder of the storm brewing both outside and within my heart. I pressed my face against the cold pane, watching the empty street through the neon glow of the flickering open sign. At 24, I'd learned that storms always passed, but the scars they left behind were permanent. My fingers unconsciously traced the thin gold chain around my neck, the only thing left of my mother, the only thing the debt collectors hadn't taken. Tonight felt different, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the lightning splitting the sky. As I turned back to wipe down tables that were already spotless, I had no idea that in less than an hour, my entire world would shatter and rebuild itself around a single act of kindness that would bind my fate to the most dangerous man in the city. The bell above the door chimed weakly as the last customer left, leaving me alone with the ghosts of my dreams and the weight of tomorrow's rent notice. I'd been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight, my body running on coffee and determination, but it still wasn't enough. Never enough. The diner's owner, Mr. Peterson, had been patient, but patience didn't pay bills, and I knew I was living on borrowed time. I grabbed my worn coat from behind the counter, the fabric thin from too many washes and too many storms weathered. As I stepped into the alley behind the diner, the rain immediately soaked through to my skin, but I barely noticed. I'd grown numb to discomfort. It was survival. That's when I saw him. A small figure huddled against the brick wall, motionless in the downpour. My heart lurched as I realized it was a child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, his dark hair plastered to his pale face. Without hesitation, I ran toward him, my worn sneakers splashing through puddles that reflected the city's harsh lights. "Hey, sweetie, are you okay?" I called out, but the boy didn't respond. As I knelt beside him, my hands shaking from more than just the cold, I could see he was burning with fever, his small body racked with violent shivers. His clothes were expensive, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than I made in a month, but money couldn't protect him from whatever illness had claimed him. "Oh God, you're burning up," I whispered, immediately shrugging off my coat and wrapping it around the unconscious child. I didn't think about the consequences, didn't consider that this might be someone else's responsibility. All I saw was a sick child who needed help, and every maternal instinct I possessed roared to life. I gathered him into my arms, surprised by how light he felt, how fragile. His fever was dangerous. I could feel the heat radiating through my thin coat, and I knew with crystal clarity that minutes might mean the difference between life and death. My tiny studio apartment was only 3 blocks away, closer than any hospital, and as I ran through the storm with the boy clutched against my chest, I made a decision that would change everything. I would save this child, no matter what it cost me. I didn't know his name, didn't know where he came from, but in that moment, he became mine to protect. The rain seemed to part around us as I ran, my heart pounding with purpose I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since my mother's death, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. If you're enjoying this story and want to know what happens next, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us as we continue bringing these stories to life. My apartment was a study in making do with less. A Murphy bed that doubled as a couch, a kitchenette that consisted of a hot plate and a mini fridge, and windows that rattled with every gust of wind. But it was warm, and it was safe, and right now, that was all that mattered. I laid the boy on my bed, his small form barely making a dent in the thin mattress. I stripped off his wet clothes with clinical efficiency, my years of caring for my dying mother kicking in. His skin was marble pale except for the flush of fever across his cheeks, and I could see a small scar above his left eyebrow that spoke of childhood adventures and protective parents who must be frantic with worry. I wrapped him in every blanket I owned, then filled a basin with cool water and began the slow process of bringing his fever down. As I worked, gently placing damp cloths on his forehead and wrists, I found myself talking to him in soft whispers. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart. I've got you now. Your parents are probably looking everywhere for you." The words were as much for my own comfort as his. I'd been alone for so long that having someone to care for, even a stranger's child, filled a hollow space in my chest I'd forgotten existed. Hours passed in a blur of temperature checks and medication from my meager first aid kit. I dozed fitfully in the chair beside the bed, jerking awake every time the boy stirred or his breathing changed. It was just after dawn when his fever finally broke, and his eyes fluttered open. the most beautiful dark eyes I'd ever seen, intelligent and alert despite his ordeal. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, and I felt something shift in the universe, a connection that defied explanation. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice hoarse but steady. There was something in his tone, a gravity that seemed too old for his young face. "You're safe," I said simply, reaching out to brush a strand of dark hair from his forehead. "I found you in the alley behind the diner where I work. You were very sick." The boy's eyes widened, and I saw a flash of something, fear, recognition, before his expression became carefully neutral. "What's your name?" "Emma Chen." "What's yours?" He hesitated for a long moment, as if weighing the consequences of his answer. "Marco," he said finally. "Marco Salvatore." The name meant nothing to me, but I could see it meant everything to him. There was a weight to it, a significance that made my stomach flutter with unease. But looking at his young face, still pale from fever, I pushed the feeling aside. Whatever his story was, he was just a child who had needed help. "Well, Marco Salvatore, you gave me quite a scare. How are you feeling?" "Better," he said, struggling to sit up. I immediately moved to help him, adjusting the pillows behind his back. "Thank you. You saved my life." There was something in the way he said it, a formality that seemed rehearsed, as if he'd been taught the proper way to express gratitude. It made my heart ache for reasons I couldn't name. "Anyone would have done the same thing," I said, but Marco shook his head. "No," he said with absolute certainty. "They wouldn't have." Before I could ask what he meant, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Mr. Peterson's number, and my stomach dropped. I was supposed to open the diner an hour ago. "I have to take this," I said apologetically, stepping into the kitchenette. "Emma, where the hell are you?" Mr. Peterson's voice was sharp with irritation. "I've got customers waiting and no one to serve them." "I'm so sorry, Mr. Peterson. There was an emergency. I don't want to hear excuses. This is the third time this month you've been late. You're on thin ice, girl." My heart sank. I couldn't afford to lose this job, but I also couldn't leave Marco alone. He was better, but still weak, and I had no idea how to contact his family. "I'll be there as soon as I can," I promised, but the line was already dead. When I turned back to Marco, I found him watching me with those two intelligent eyes. "You're in trouble because of me," he said. It wasn't a question. "It's not your fault," I said quickly. "I just need to figure out how to get you home. Do you remember your parents' phone number?" Something flickered across Marco's face. Pain, maybe, or fear. "It's complicated," he said finally. "What do you mean?" Marco was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with something internal. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My father. He's not like other fathers. People are afraid of him." A chill ran down my spine, but I kept my voice gentle. "What's your father's name, Marco?" "Vincent Salvatore." The name hit me like a physical blow. Even I, who avoided the news and lived in my own small world of survival, knew that name. Vincent Salvatore was the head of the most powerful crime family on the East Coast, a man whose very name was whispered in fear and respect. And I had his son in my bed, wrapped in my grandmother's quilt, looking at me with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. "Oh," I breathed, sinking into the chair beside the bed. "You're scared now," Marco said, and there was resignation in his voice that broke my heart. "No," I said firmly, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I'm not scared of you, Marco. You're just a little boy who was sick and needed help." "But my father—" "Your father isn't here," I interrupted gently. "You are, and right now, that's all that matters." Marco stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his expression I couldn't quite identify. Hope, maybe, or wonder, as if he'd never encountered someone who could separate him from his father's reputation. "We should call him," I said finally. "He must be worried sick." Marco's face went pale. "You don't understand. When I disappeared, there would have been consequences. People might have been hurt." The weight of what he was saying settled over me like a shroud. This wasn't just about a lost child. This was about power and violence, and a world I'd never imagined touching my own. "How long was I gone?" Marco asked, and I could hear the fear in his voice. "About 12 hours, I said, and watched his face crumble. "Oh God," he whispered. "He's going to tear the city apart looking for me." As if summoned by his words, the sound of car doors slamming echoed from the street below. I moved to the window and peered through the blinds. my blood turning to ice at what I saw. 3 black SUVs were parked outside my building, and men in expensive suits were emerging from them, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Even from 4 stories up, I could see the bulges of weapons beneath their jackets. "They found me," Marco said quietly from behind me. My mind raced. I thought of Mr. Peterson's anger, of the rent notice on my kitchen table, of the careful life I'd built from nothing. All of it was about to be swept away by forces beyond my control. But when I looked at Marco, still pale and fragile from his fever, I felt that same protective instinct that had driven me to save him in the first place. "Are you in trouble?" I asked. Marco shook his head. "No, but you might be." Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, and I knew we were out of time. I moved to the bed and sat beside Marco, taking his small hand in mine. "Whatever happens," I said, "I want you to know that I'm glad I found you. I'm glad I could help." Marco squeezed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Emma?" "Yes?" "Thank you for seeing me. Just me. Not my name, not my father. Just me." Before I could respond, there was a sharp knock at my door. Not the polite knock of a neighbor or delivery person, but the authoritative rap of someone accustomed to having doors opened immediately. "Marco Salvatore," a deep voice called through the door. "We know you're in there." I looked at Marco, who had gone very still beside me. "What do I do?" I whispered. "Open the door," he said quietly. "And whatever you do, don't lie to my father. He always knows." I stood on shaking legs and walked to the door. My hand hesitated on the deadbolt, and I realized that opening this door would be like opening a gateway between 2 worlds. My small, safe existence and something vast and dangerous that I couldn't begin to understand. But Marco was depending on me, and I'd never walked away from someone who needed my help. I opened the door. The man standing in my doorway was not what I'd expected. Vincent Salvatore was tall and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair, and the kind of presence that seemed to fill a room before he even entered it. His face was carved from granite, all sharp angles and controlled power, but his eyes, dark eyes exactly like Marco's, held a desperation that was almost human. Behind him stood 4 men who looked like they could break me in half without breaking a sweat, but Vincent raised a hand, and they remained in the hallway. "Miss Chen," he said, and I was surprised by the courtesy in his tone. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Daddy?" Marco's voice came from behind me, small and uncertain. Vincent's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The controlled mask slipped, revealing raw relief and something that looked suspiciously like fear. He stepped into my apartment, his eyes locked on his son, and I saw his hand shake as he reached out. "Marco," he breathed, and the single word contained volumes of emotion. "Jesus Christ, Marco, I thought—" "I'm okay," Marco said quickly, struggling to get out of bed. "Emma saved me. I was sick, and she took care of me." Vincent's eyes snapped to me, and I felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. I'd expected anger, maybe violence, but what I saw in his face was something far more complex. "You saved my son," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Anyone would have—" I began, but Vincent cut me off with a sharp gesture. "No," he said firmly, "they wouldn't have. Do you have any idea what you've done?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "I helped a sick child." "You helped my sick child," Vincent corrected, moving to Marco and pulling him into an embrace that was fierce and protective. "Do you know what that means?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. Vincent looked at me over Marco's head, and I saw something in his expression that made my knees weak. It wasn't gratitude. It was something deeper, more binding. "It means you're family now," he said simply, "whether you want to be or not." The words hung in the air between us like a promise and a threat, and I realized that my life as I knew it was over. I'd saved a child in the rain, and in doing so, I'd stepped into a world where kindness came with consequences I couldn't imagine. But as I watched Vincent hold his son, saw the relief and love in his eyes, I found that I didn't regret my choice. Whatever came next, I'd done the right thing, and sometimes, doing the right thing changed everything. Marco pulled away from his father and looked at me with those serious, dark eyes. "She took care of me all night," he said. "She gave me her bed and her blankets. She didn't even know who I was." Vincent's gaze returned to me, and I felt exposed under his scrutiny, as if he could see straight through to my soul. "Is that true?" "He was sick," I said simply. "He needed help." "And you didn't think to call the police?" Or a hospital? I lifted my chin, finding courage I didn't know I possessed. He needed immediate care. I gave him what I could. Something flickered in Vincent's eyes. Approval, maybe, or respect. "Show me," he said. I led him to the kitchenette, where the basin of water and damp cloths still sat on the counter. I showed him the thermometer, the children's aspirin I'd crushed and dissolved in water, the careful notes I'd made tracking Marco's temperature through the night. Vincent picked up one of the notebooks, scanning my neat handwriting. "You documented everything. I wanted to make sure his fever was really breaking," I explained. "I was worried about complications." "You have medical training?" "No, but I took care of my mother before she died. Cancer." Vincent set down the notebook and studied my face. "How old are you?" 24. "And you live here alone?" I nodded, suddenly aware of how small and shabby my apartment must look to someone like him. But Vincent didn't seem to be judging my circumstances. He was evaluating something else entirely. "What do you do for work?" "I'm a waitress. At Rosie's Diner." "The place where you found Marco?" "Behind it, in the alley." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him processing information, making calculations I couldn't follow. "Mr. Salvatore," I said finally, "I should probably get to work. My boss is already angry that I'm late." "No," Vincent said firmly. "You're not going back there." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're not safe there anymore. The moment word gets out that you helped my son, that place becomes a target. You become a target." The reality of what he was saying hit me like a sledgehammer. I'd been so focused on helping Marco that I hadn't considered the broader implications. In Vincent Salvatore's world, kindness came with a price. "But I need that job," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "I can't afford—" "You don't need to worry about money anymore," Vincent interrupted. "I take care of what's mine." "I'm not yours," I said quickly, and immediately regretted it when I saw Vincent's expression darken. "You saved my son's life," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "That makes you mine whether you like it or not. The only question is whether you're going to fight me on it or accept it." I looked at Marco, who was watching the exchange with worried eyes. I thought about my tiny apartment, my dead-end job, the constant struggle just to survive. Then I thought about the warmth I'd felt taking care of Marco, the sense of purpose that had been missing from my life for so long. "What exactly are you offering?" I asked. Vincent's expression softened slightly. "Protection, security, a place in my family. And in return, you continue to care for Marco. He needs someone like you in his life." I looked at the little boy who had stumbled into my world like a gift wrapped in danger. "What about what Marco wants?" "I want Emma to stay," Marco said immediately. "Please, Daddy. She makes me feel safe." The simple words hit me like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had felt safe with me? When was the last time I'd felt truly needed? "I'll need to think about it," I said finally. Vincent nodded, but there was something in his eyes that suggested thinking might be a luxury I couldn't afford. "Of course, but you'll think about it somewhere safe. Pack a bag." "I can't just leave." "Yes," Vincent said firmly. "You can. And you will." There was no arguing with the finality in his tone. I moved to my closet and began throwing clothes into a duffel bag, my mind reeling with the speed at which my life was changing. 24 hours ago, my biggest worry had been making rent. Now I was packing to go into hiding with the most dangerous man in the city. As I packed, I became aware of Vincent moving around my apartment, and I realized he was memorizing every detail. The stack of medical bills on my kitchen table, the photograph of my mother on the nightstand, the books I'd borrowed from the library and couldn't afford to buy. "Your mother," he said, picking up the photograph. "She was beautiful. She was everything," I said quietly. "How long has she been gone?" 2 years. Pancreatic cancer." Vincent set the photograph down gently. "I'm sorry for your loss." The unexpected kindness in his voice made my throat tight with emotion. "Thank you. Is there anyone else? Family? Friends who might worry?" I shook my head. "It's just me." Something flickered across Vincent's face. An emotion I couldn't identify. "Not anymore," he said quietly. When I finished packing, Vincent gestured toward the door. "Ready?" I looked around my apartment one last time, at the life I was leaving behind. It hadn't been much, but it had been mine. Now I was stepping into the unknown, tied to a man, and a world I didn't understand. But as we walked toward the door, Marco slipped his small hand into mine, and I felt that same protective instinct that had started this whole chain of events. Whatever came next, I would face it. For him. The hallway was filled with Vincent's men, all of them alert and watchful. I felt their eyes on me as we walked toward the elevator, and I realized that my anonymity was gone forever. I was no longer just Emma Chen, struggling waitress. I was the woman who had saved Vincent Salvatore's son. In the elevator, Marco pressed close to my side, and I could feel his exhaustion. The fever had broken, but he was still weak, still recovering. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" I asked softly. "Better," he said, then looked up at his father. "Daddy, Emma gave me her coat in the rain, and her bed, and she stayed awake all night to make sure I was okay." Vincent's eyes met mine in the reflection of the elevator doors. "Did she?" "She sang to me when I had bad dreams," Marco continued. "Mama used to sing to me." The elevator fell silent, and I saw Vincent's jaw tighten. I realized that Marco's mother was a subject fraught with pain, but before I could say anything, the elevator doors opened. The lobby of my building had been transformed. More men in suits stood at every exit, their presence both protective and intimidating. I felt like I was in a movie, except the consequences were real, and there was no script to follow. Outside, the black SUVs waited like sleeping predators. Vincent guided me toward the middle vehicle, his hand on the small of my back. The touch was light, almost respectful, but I could feel the strength in it, the barely contained power. As we settled into the leather seats, Marco immediately curled up against my side, his small body seeking the comfort I'd provided through the night. Vincent watched this with an expression I couldn't read. "Where are we going?" I asked, as the convoy pulled away from my building. "Home," Vincent said simply. "Your home?" "Our home," he corrected, and I felt the weight of possession in the words. The drive took us through parts of the city I'd never seen, past manicured lawns and iron gates, into a world of wealth and privilege that seemed like another planet. When we finally stopped, I found myself staring at a mansion that looked like something from a movie, all stone and glass, an imposing elegance. "This is where you live?" I asked Marco, who nodded sleepily. "It's big," he said, "but it gets lonely sometimes." The simple admission made my heart ache. For all his privilege, Marco was still just a little boy who needed love and attention. Vincent helped us out of the car, and I was immediately surrounded by staff, housekeepers and security personnel, who all seemed to know exactly what to do. But Vincent kept me close, his presence a constant reminder that I was under his protection now. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. Marble floors and crystal chandeliers, artwork that probably cost more than I had made in my entire life. But it felt cold, impersonal, like a museum rather than a home. "Mrs. Romano will show you to your room," Vincent said, gesturing to an older woman with kind eyes. "You'll be staying in the East Wing near Marco." "Near Marco?" I repeated. "You're his caregiver now," Vincent said matter-of-factly. "That means you stay close." I wanted to protest, to say that I hadn't agreed to anything yet, but Marco's hand tightened in mine, and I realized that my decision had already been made. The moment I'd wrapped my coat around a sick child in the rain, I'd chosen my path. Mrs. Romano led us through a maze of hallways to a suite of rooms that was larger than my entire apartment. The bedroom was decorated in soft blues and creams, with a sitting area and a bathroom that looked like something from a luxury hotel. "Mr. Salvatore had these rooms prepared for you," Mrs. Romano explained. "If you need anything at all, just press this button." She indicated a small panel beside the bed. "Someone will come immediately." I nodded numbly, still trying to process the magnitude of the change in my circumstances. "Marco, sweetheart," Mrs. Romano continued, "your father wants you to rest. You've had quite an adventure." Marco looked up at me with worried eyes. "You'll be here when I wake up?" "I'll be here," I promised, and meant it. After Mrs. Romano left with Marco, I found myself alone in the opulent room, trying to make sense of what had happened. I moved to the window and looked out at the perfectly manicured gardens, at the high walls that surrounded the property. It was beautiful, but it was also a prison of sorts, a golden cage that came with protection and luxury, but also with obligations I was only beginning to understand. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting Mrs. Romano or perhaps another member of the staff. Instead, Vincent entered, and I felt the air in the room change. He seemed to fill the space with his presence, making the large room feel suddenly intimate. Are you comfortable? He asked, though his eyes suggested he was asking about more than just the accommodations. It's beautiful, I said honestly, but I feel like I'm in someone else's life. Vincent moved closer, and I caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made my pulse quicken despite myself. This is your life now, he said quietly. The sooner you accept that, the easier it will be. And if I don't want to accept it? Vincent's eyes darkened. Then you'll be miserable, and Marco will suffer for it. Is that what you want? The question was like a knife to my heart. Of course not. Then stop fighting this. Stop fighting me. I looked up at him, at this man who had turned my world upside down with his gratitude and his protection, and his absolute certainty that he knew what was best for everyone around him. I don't know how to be what you need me to be, I admitted. Something softened in Vincent's expression. You already are what we need you to be. You saved my son without thinking about the consequences. You cared for him like he was your own. That's not something that can be taught. But I don't know anything about your world. About the danger, the violence. You don't need to know about that. Vincent interrupted. That's my world. Your world is Marco. Your world is safe. I wanted to believe him, but I'd seen the guns, the security, the careful choreography of protection that surrounded every moment of their lives. What happened to his mother? I asked quietly. Vincent's face went completely still, and I immediately regretted the question. She died, he said finally, 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Cancer, Vincent continued, and I heard the echo of my own loss in his voice. She fought it for 2 years, but in the end, that's why Marco was so sick, I realized. He was scared of being sick like she was. Vincent nodded, and I saw a flash of vulnerability in his eyes that made my chest tight. He's been having nightmares, Vincent admitted, about getting sick, about dying. The doctors say it's normal, but you feel helpless, I finished. I can protect him from bullets and kidnapping attempts and every external threat imaginable, Vincent said, his voice rough with emotion. But I can't protect him from his own fears. I felt something shift inside my chest, a recognition of shared pain and shared love for the little boy who had brought us together. Maybe that's why I found him, I said softly. Maybe he needed someone who understood what it's like to lose a mother to cancer. Vincent stared at me for a long moment, and I felt the weight of his attention like a physical touch. Maybe, he said finally, or maybe you both needed each other. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that I wasn't ready to examine. But before I could respond, Vincent's phone buzzed, and the moment was broken. I have to take this, he said, checking the display. But Emma? Yes. Thank you. For saving him. For being here. He paused, seeming to struggle with words. For being exactly what he needed when he needed it most. After he left, I sank into the plush armchair by the window and tried to process everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, I'd been a struggling waitress with no family and no prospects. Now I was living in a mansion, caring for the son of a man who commanded fear and respect in equal measure. But it wasn't the luxury or the danger that made my head spin. It was the way Vincent had looked at me when he'd thanked me, as if I was something precious and rare. It was the way Marco had curled against my side in the car, trusting and safe. It was the feeling that, for the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts, and Marco peered around the door, his dark hair still mussed from sleep. Emma, are you really going to stay? I looked at this little boy who had stumbled into my life like a miracle wrapped in a storm, and felt my heart make the decision my mind was still wrestling with. Yes, sweetheart, I said, opening my arms to him. I'm going to stay. Marco ran to me, throwing his small arms around my neck, and I felt the last of my resistance crumble. Whatever this new life brought, danger, luxury, complications I couldn't imagine, I would face it. Because sometimes saving someone else was the same as saving yourself. And as Marco settled in my lap, chattering about his room and his toys and all the things he wanted to show me, I realized that I wasn't just his caregiver now. I was his protector, his comfort, his anchor in a world that could be beautiful and terrible in equal measure. I was home. 6 months later, I stood in the garden behind the Salvatore mansion, watching Marco chase butterflies among the roses. The little boy who had collapsed in the rain was now healthy and vibrant, his laughter echoing off the stone walls like music. The nightmares had faded, replaced by dreams of adventures and stories I told him each night. I wore a simple sundress now, my hair longer and shinier from proper nutrition and care. The constant worry lines around my eyes had softened, replaced by a contentment I'd never thought possible. In my hand, I held a letter. Acceptance to the nursing program at the local university. Tuition paid in full by a scholarship from an anonymous donor. I knew who that donor was, just as I knew that Marco Salvatore took care of what was his. "Emma!" Marco called, running toward me with a butterfly perched on his finger. "Look, it's not scared of me anymore." "That's because you're gentle with it," I said, kneeling to his level. "When you're kind and patient, beautiful things aren't afraid to come close." Marco beamed at me, then carefully encouraged the butterfly back to the flowers. As he ran off to explore more of the garden, I felt a familiar presence behind me. "He's happy," Vincent said, his voice warm with satisfaction. "He is," I agreed, not turning around. I'd learned to recognize the sound of his footsteps, the subtle change in the air when he was near. "And you?" he asked, moving to stand beside me. "Are you happy?" I considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, I would have said happiness was a luxury I couldn't afford. Now, watching Marco play in a garden that had become as much mine as his, I realized that happiness wasn't something you earned. It was something you chose. "Yes," I said simply. "I am." Vincent nodded, and we stood in comfortable silence, watching Marco's innocent joy. In the distance, I could see the security team maintaining their careful watch, a reminder that our happiness existed within carefully guarded walls. But inside those walls, we had built something real, a family forged not by blood, but by choice, by sacrifice, by the simple act of caring for someone who needed it. "Emma," Vincent said quietly, and something in his tone made me look at him. "I have something for you." He held out a small velvet box, and my heart skipped. But when I opened it, instead of a ring, I found a delicate gold locket, antique and beautiful, with intricate engravings that caught the afternoon light. "It was my mother's," Vincent explained, "and before that, my grandmother's. It's meant to hold pictures of the people you love most." My throat tightened with emotion. "Vincent, I can't." "You can," he said firmly. "You're family now. Really family. This is your place, Emma. Here, with us." And as he fastened the locket around my neck, his fingers brushing against my skin, I felt the last piece of my old life fall away. I was no longer the poor waitress who had saved a boy in the rain. I was Emma Salvatore in all but name, protector and beloved, part of something larger and more meaningful than I'd ever imagined possible. Marco ran back to us, his cheeks flushed with happiness. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the locket. "It's a family heirloom," Vincent explained. "Emma is family now, so it belongs to her." Marco's face lit up with pure joy. "Really? Emma's really our family forever?" "Forever," Vincent confirmed, his eyes meeting mine with a promise that went deeper than words. As the three of us walked back toward the house, Marco's small hand in mine and Vincent's presence steady and protective beside us, I realized that sometimes the most profound changes came from the simplest acts of kindness. I had rushed to save a boy collapsing in the rain, not knowing he was the Mafia boss's son. But in saving him, I had saved myself, and found a love and belonging I'd never dared to dream possible. The storm that had brought us together was long past, but the shelter we'd built together would weather any storm to come. Thank you for following this story to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is essential for me to continue creating content like this.